Hello out there in Twitch land. Thank you for joining us. Just a really quick check-in to make sure you can hear me. Hello, Katrina. So barring that, my name is Mike Diamond. I am the Chief Catalyst and Troublemaker here at the Old Ways. And we are going to make a monster tonight. And to make a monster, I have been joined by a couple of my castmates, equally good at troublemaking themselves. We'll get to that in a second. So at the top of the stream, what I'd like to do is just thank you for joining us, whether it's here live on Twitch or whether it's through a video on demand. We appreciate the and respect the value of your time. And so with that said, I'm going to get to some table introductions. And so I'll just say to my virtual right.
Hey y'all, I'm Rena. You may know me as Lady Elizabeth on Horror in the Orient Express or as Tamarisk Anvari in our Coriolis campaign, which is running on Thursdays. You may also know me from various streams around the internets, including Symphony Entertainment and the Miskatonic Playhouse. And I am a writer of Call of Cthulhu scenarios, including the gold best-selling Saturday the 14th, Jolene, and my latest scenario, A Long Day's Night, which involves 1950s mobsters. So I am an editor, I am a writer, and I am a voice filling your ears with my mellifluous tones.
Okay, I appreciate the update on my mic chat. I appreciate that.
Mm.
Let me know if this is any better. While you do that, I'm going to get to our other guest tonight, so go right ahead, Heather.
Hi, everybody. This is Valley Girl Heather. I am a RPG writer, designer, business owner. I am one of the co-owners and creatives at Pick Up and Go Games. We're a small independent RPG company. I am also one half of the duo Geeks Unplugged that focuses primarily on videos and TikToks, so YouTube, and doing retro video games and collecting and hunting. I am a streamer and actual play actor, I guess, on Old Ways podcast. If you have listened to the Masks scenario, I was Stasi. I am currently in the RuneQuest Glorantha 6 seasons in Sartar. I play Lysana. A bunch of other stuff coming down the pipeline that you may or may not have seen. I'm also pretty active on TikTok and all the socials, both under Valley Girl and as me. So there's a lot more there, but we'll just cut it there.
Yeah, sure, certainly. So tonight, the purpose of tonight is to make a monster. And the three of us sort of kicked around a bunch of ideas about how to approach this. And I think the best way is through the lens of understanding what we think are monsters. Maybe not the best monster, maybe not the worst monster, but what are the things that key in when we think of a monster? What images and what ideas bubble up, and then maybe give a example of a monster we've created, because I think it's important to highlight just how those thoughts and inspirations eventually translated into real work. So when I think about a monster or something which is monstrous, I think of it as something that reflects a part of humanity back at itself. And that could be in the form of a terrible thought, or that could be in the form of something horrific in the way that someone might act or think or dream about, and it sort of just comes alive from there. So that's one of the ways I view monsters. I view monsters as reflections of humanity's worst facets. I think it's a good way to look at them because it gives people an ability to connect to those things, right? And that's not to say that there aren't things which are, we'll just say one potentially important historical author called unknowable, unnameable, unseeable, unfill in the word. And those have relevancy. They do have a good position here amongst horror. But I tend to think of something that is in basis something is tangible that you can recognize and then see how it has been mutated or changed. Rena, how do you view monsters?
I view monsters in a similar way, a mirror reflecting things back at humanity, but with usually with an added inhuman twist to them, like fangs or wolf skin or whatever, to make it more palatable, in a way, because it removes us one step from the thing that we're facing. So it's you look at things with Dracula, for example, and it's like, oh well, it's a vampire that's not really human. We can step back from it and not really feel it in ourselves. That's part of what makes the monstrous, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Heather, how do you view things that which are monsters or monstrous? How do you encapsulate them?
So I would absolutely agree with the reflection of society and its generally its ills. But I think it can be expanded more on that because there are the creatures that are out there that, when they are written as such, can reflect even some of the absurdities, but also the maybe the some of the heart, some of the good qualities of us as as of humanity, and they do so because it in that case it's reflecting, hey, here is something that the normals would see as monstrous or horrific or to be feared or hated, but this is actually a quality that we should have, that we should actually recognize and celebrate. But because of maybe the visage or the circumstances, because they are different, they are not as accepted. So I think it's not just a fear-based, rar, this thing's coming coming right at you, but this is something that we should, if we had time and the headspace to actually think about it, this is something that maybe we should embrace or celebrate, just because, but they're different and they cause fear. And I think in that case, it reflects back that whole fear and the horror of humanity. It basically is definitely a mirror holding up to us and saying, it's not the creature, it's us that's having that.
Mm.
Okay. And I
Yeah,
got my monster, my creature shirt. Had to show this off a little bit to everyone. I'm dressed for the occasion here.
I think it's an interesting point when we talk about how society writ large, given the place that the creature, the monster might inhabit, how the way society views it could be in a different lens, right? So there's a salient point there when it comes to how a creature might be viewed. Many monsters throughout history of written in film and even in gaming books could be completely benign. They cause no trouble at all, but because there is something else within the area, say humans, they view it as a threat because it is not them. And so the creature, like Rena had talked about, sort of gets that step between them of, oh, well, that's not one of us, and we can't possibly, accept that because it's not us. So that's one point we can sort of put in our hat there and come back to in a second. What I also too wanted to explore here was monsters that these creators have created. One's either in published material that is already out or material that might come out later. And so I only have one offering on the Miskatonic repository at this time, and that is Time of the Serpent. It is the seed scenario that was based around the Masks game before our Masks of Nyarlathotep journey began, and that was set in Chicago. And the creature is essentially a creature that has been summoned up to feed and hopefully to be used by our traditional bad guy NPC, who's a evil sorcerer. And I called them the Finger of Yig, and they're basically an enormously elongated snake with poison breath and caustic teeth and multiple tongues and that sort of thing. And I think the reason why I chose to create it after that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that Chthonians can't possibly be in any Miskatonic work because they're copyrighted, of course. But I loved the idea that they might burrow into the earth and take people and eat them potentially, or just ingest them and take them into this subterranean layer where they could be slowly digested over a long period of time, or could be potentially sacrificed as POW in the Call of Cthulhu system to Yig as a sort of offering. And there is an option in that scenario to see them and to potentially sort of fight this evil sorcerer for control. And I liked that because I wanted to give this monster in specific the ability to show that it does not necessarily have to be a creature which is always on the attack, that it could be something that which be used by the PCs. So Tefa Games, I'll answer your chat message here. I have not created anything specific in the Masks campaign when it comes to, like, the later chapters, when it comes to creatures. I used most of the written material because, frankly, the 7th edition of the Masks campaign is very well written, and written after years and years of review by Chaosium, including some of the original authors and, of course, some new authors like friend of the show, Scott Dorwood from The Good Friends, who wrote the Peru chapter. That said, I think that there's a whole can we can open up when we talk about, we'll just say, customizing campaigns written, which you could drop special monsters into. But what I want to do is ask Rena if they would tell us about a monster they've created.
So my favorite monster I've created is for Saturday the 14th, which, spoilers incoming if you haven't read that one. But the creature I created was my very first actual monster that wasn't just representations of other mythological figures. And this is the Seer. And the Seer is an entity that is ancient and unknowable, but is very violent in nature because, well, Saturday the 14th is a love letter and an homage to 80s slasher films, if you couldn't tell from the title. It is a spiritual sequel to Friday the 13th. And the idea was that this violent sort of creature learned about humanity's own propensity for violence, and basically is, you've got your machetes, you've got your saws and things that it can produce, but you also have a bunch of eyes in the back of its skull. If you manage to remove the bunch of its skull, showing the idea of watching things and looking and learning about things, and it kills very violently in the style of 1980s slashers, and it will kill you again and again and again and again for reasons that happen in this scenario. But it's this idea of seeing humanity's propensity for violence and going, I could do that. That sounds fun to me. And then making people relive that violence over and over and over instead of, it feeds on other people's reactions to violence. It feeds on making you relive the violence as well, not just the violence itself, which kind of reflects the idea of how we see things on TV. We watch the violence. We watch other people commit violence when we watch our slasher movies, which I absolutely love, and other things. And we watch it, we relive that horror, but one step removed. Well, with the Seer, you're not a step removed. You're right goddamn in the thick of it.
What? You like horror movies? I couldn't have guessed.
No, shocker. Absolute shocker. I know.
So I think that
Never would have seen that coming.
If I could ask just one follow-up to that. It's interesting how that creature feeds off of what it sees us do and then sort of echoes it back and then urges us to continue to do it, or pumps that sort of experience into our brains through the magic of the mythos, so that way we can experience all of our own horrors. And so I wonder, is that a creature that could be exposed to something else and be affected by it? Like, let's just say, for whatever reason, someone were to play through that scenario and all they wanted to do was show that creature love and affection through giving it to others. Do you think it's an effective tactic that might be, a keeper might go, I hadn't thought about that. So maybe the slasher here decides something different needs to happen, or maybe it stops and watches.
Mhm. I think it could potentially stop and watch because it might find it fascinating. It's something brand new after all of this time because it's been in the lake since time immemorial, and has seen death and drownings and brutal violence happen on its shores. I'm not sure it would participate in it though, because its whole way of feeding is on violence. It feeds off of blood and gore and death. So it might stand and watch for a bit. It might find it interesting as an attempt, but I think overall it would go, you're tasty.
Fantastic. Okay, so Heather, talk us through a monster you've created.
Well, I am currently in the process of writing some of my first scenarios for the Miskatonic repository. I'm really excited about it. It's called the Blue Room series, and there's currently 7 ideas. I couldn't decide. I know, yay! And of those 7, the two that I'm really my brain seems to be bouncing between. One is Rhapsody in Cobalt, which it's all about music. It's the main. It's a solo adventure. The main your main character will go through as part. You are part of the symphony. You've worked your butt off. Music is your whole life, and then a mysterious figure starts appearing as the late nights that you stay to practice because you're desperately trying to move up within the symphony. And it's what I'm calling the Lyricant. And the Lyricant, it's kind of an homage in a way to like the creatures like the Phantom of the Opera, and similar ideas. And it's funny that the new Doctor Who that just dropped and actually has music incarnate. And I'm kind of like, no, because this is kind of what that is. This creature feeds off of the performance. It feeds off of the creation. It's of the music, of the passion, those intense emotions that come from someone who is narrowing their focus to such a singular point that nothing else really matters except what they're doing, and this is the music. And as this creature, and I don't want to give too much away, but as this creature kind of slowly starts to come forward and take form, and it starts in the form of, it starts to influence and whispers and inspiration, and then it actually kind of starts taking form. And over time, it basically becomes this all-encompassing being that is basically becomes a part of you. It's almost becomes symbiotic. So I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to give too much away, and I haven't fully developed it yet, but that's the way it's going, and I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, no, sounds great. I think Katra in chat is absolutely right. I think you might be tapped into a specific zeitgeist, and so that's totally kosher. I would just say to you, it wouldn't be the first time a creator has begun or in the middle of creating something or nearly about to publish something when they see something in mass media that reflects 95% of what they're thinking or planning on doing. Just ask the folks at Arc Dream Publishing when they got ready to produce Delta Green and the X Files dropped.
Oh, geez, yeah.
And there's nothing they can do about it. You just keep going, and take it as the universe is harmonizing potentially with something that you're doing. Okay.
Well, it hits on a few bases. I mean, there was a movie, what was it, about 5-6 years ago with J.K. Simmons and Miles Teller, where he plays an up-and-coming drummer, and J.K. Simmons plays the instructor, and it's just about this. And the character, the teacher, is almost monstrous in his abusive techniques to bring out the best in Miles Teller's drummer character. So it kind of falls into that. So it's not exactly like what Doctor Who, but it's just funny that happened to like drop at the same time. And I love Jinx Monsoon, and it's just so, it was such a beautifully written episode. So yeah, I'm jealous.
The movie Whiplash is fantastic.
Whiplash, that's it. Thank you.
The line I always remember from that movie is "Not my tempo," and J.K. is such a monster in that that film for what he does. And if you have not seen it, you should totally check it out. Okay. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is open the book, as it were, to chat and its help at us making a monster. And so we have 2 roads which we can go down, right? At least initially. We can make, with you all, the environment in which this monster exists in, right? Or we can begin work on the monster itself and then later on talk about where it lives, what it does, the more ecology therein. I would like chat to tell me, just in a single word, either work on the monster or work on where it lives. Just give me some feedback and get an idea about what you want, where we want to start first. It'll allow me to take a drink. We don't have this special fun hydrate buttons just yet. That is coming
Yeah.
in the near future.
Ooh, this is pretty unanimous here. I think they actually want us to figure out the environment.
Okay, I love
So it's
that.
looking good.
So
I love when chat comes together.
me too. So let's talk about where we want our monster to live. Well, I think what we'll do is I'll throw out an idea. We'll have everybody give a chance to talk about where they think the monster could live. And the place I'm going to pick is a modern day industrial park.
Ooh. That's fun.
That has a lot of possibility.
But-
There's a lot that
but-
could be done there.
But please give me and the channel your own interpretation. Where do you think you would like the monster to go? And we'll just have chat pick.
So I was thinking along similar lines, but in a water park, something along the lines of SeaWorld, something with where you already have animals and creatures and so on. It could hide or mask itself. That's kind of what I was thinking along there.
Okay, so zoo or theme park. I'm going to ask you to pick a lane. Which one?
More, well, I was thinking more of one that's a hybrid of both, which is like SeaWorld, that kind of thing.
Okay, so we'll just say SeaWorld. That's totally fine.
Yeah, SeaWorld.
All right, Heather. What for location? What do you think?
For me, I tend to go more classics. So I am looking at one of those very old mortuary crematoriums that has been family business that's been operating for decades and has a incredibly large graveyard surrounding it that's kind of on the outskirts of town, where you don't necessarily are going to hear the screams or the any of the weird sounds or noises or light or see the weird lights that are going on behind the scenes, as who knows what there's the options could, there's so many options that you could actually utilize in just that setting.
Okay, so creepy house, roughly. Cemetery, creepy house nearby, etc.
Yeah.
So I want to get your vibe right. So we have that. We have SeaWorld, or we have an abandoned industrial park. And as Rachel mentions in chat, Rust Belt, which is essentially part of where I live. So I know all about the Rust Belt. But I like that idea too.
Yeah.
So chat, where do you want us to where do you want us to start? We have a vote for SeaWorld. We have two votes for SeaWorld.
I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and we spent a lot of time at SeaWorld. So I spent a lot of time thinking about stories and so on when I was there with my family.
Okay.
Yep. I think Rena's taking this one.
That's fine. It's not a competition.
Which
It's a friendly monster build.
Friendly monster
Besides,
build.
it's all happy and family friendly on the outside, but the horrors that lurk below and behind.
Yes, the horrors that lurk inside the admission fee.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. I get one. He's giving me a sympathy vote.
Okay, so sympathy votes aside, we are going to anchor ourselves in SeaWorld.
Oh.
So we're at SeaWorld now. So I would like us to decide on a time of day where this creature is most active based off the environment. Is it something that is able, agile, perhaps hidden enough to operate during the daytime, or must it wait until the guests have left, all the pool cleaning is done for the evening, and as the last person turns out the light at SeaWorld, it creeps out of whatever pool that it can find? So what do you think, Rena? Do you want to play this
Mhm.
during the day, or do you want to play it during the evening?
I find it more interesting during the day because a lot of creature features and things happen at night. So I feel like it's a lot more interesting if things happen during the day.
Okay. So our creature is going to live in and around SeaWorld. I'm just going to write this down, just so that way we have some notes. And then we're going to say that it operates during the daytime. Now, because we know that it operates during the daytime, because it needs to be able to, like Skip is mentioning in chat, it needs to be able to get food. Like
Hmm.
it doesn't have a ton of food potential that it can get to without probably being fought back uh, by other, amphibians or other mammals that exist at SeaWorld. So it wants to prey on, the defenseless stuffed animals, potentially random children that might be running around, or adults that get lost, that sort of thing. So we've established then that it operates during the daytime. Okay. I would then like to establish whether or not this creature is something which lives in the water or can simply move, swim, exist in the water. Is it something that is water based and must stay in the water, or like-minded spaces? So is it water dependent?
I don't think so. I think to be able to truly be able to move around a facility as large as SeaWorld, it would have to be kind of almost tardigrade style, where it could exist quite comfortably in a number of different environments, whether it's hiding, and going slightly dormant in um, a refrigerated section in one of the eateries, to swimming through the water, to sliding its way through whatever drainage system would more than likely be in place for something like this. I think it needs to be very able to kind of transition through a setup like as large and as expansive as SeaWorld.
Okay, that's an interesting take. Rena, what do you think?
I think something similar, yeah, needs to be able to move around. Otherwise, it's just sort of leaping up out of water tanks and grabbing people, which would be a bit ostentatious.
We would never make an ostentatious monster.
Never, ever.
I sort of like the idea that yeah, it isn't confined to water, but can move through it. And the reason isn't necessarily for any sort of ostentatious concerns. I think that it gives it much more of that hybrid quality, where
Hmm.
it can certainly sit in water, underwater. Perhaps it has the ability to hold its breath. We'll sort of wait on some of those answers until we get to the creature side. But as far as its movements go, it needs to be something which isn't confined just to water. So we'll say that it's not water dependent, and so it can move throughout the day as it needs to, lurking and hunting amongst both the concrete slabs and the deep pools. Okay. So, if we're thinking about its surroundings, sort of where it lives, we've determined that SeaWorld is part of it. We've determined that it's not water dependent, but is something that can move back and forth between the two. We need to determine then what its main food source is. There's there's a ton of water that's nearby already, right? Whether it's chlorinated or whether it's literally the sea, depending upon how it takes hydration in. We need to figure out what it eats. So what is its main food source? And I would absolutely love to hear chat's opinion on what's its main food source.
Hmm.
Oh, that's a good one, Tegan. Salt. Yeah.
It eats salt.
Well, think of it, the sodium that's in bodily fluids, among other things, and then in various
Salt and
actual
water.
human consumable food sources and whatnot. And that's actually very classic. That actually goes back to like Star Trek, I believe.
Yeah,
Even
the very first
that was,
episode.
I think, yeah, it was they have a few of those where it lives off of salt. That's a really classic and a very versatile one too. Love that idea.
So my question is then is, and I'll sort of challenge Tegan and the rest of you on this, is do we want to ape Star Wars or Star Trek for that matter? Can we come up with something that's a little bit more unique, perhaps, that doesn't come from a period or a property we've already seen? There's other things to eat at SeaWorld than salt.
Mm-hmm.
What about, I mean, if we're talking, if it's parasitic in nature, just going off of an idea, if not necessarily the salt, I mean, the potassium or some type of minerals that it would get through direct contact from, others.
Okay, so yeah,
I mean,
Tegan's bringing up ammonia. That's an interesting thought, ammonia, and so is scales for that matter. But I don't mind the idea too of something that has a super high potassium diet. Like it needs it, and so it could potentially feed on bananas for that matter. But also people are full of potassium too.
Mm-hmm.
Salts, yeah, different salts, different flavors, ammonium salts. Yeah, salt itself isn't necessarily the sodium. It could be any number of things, and there are several bodies of work out there over the last several decades of science fiction primarily that where stuff like that comes from. So it would actually be very classic to be able to go with that flaked skin. Oh.
It's building a monster, not building something that's gross necessarily. But I think we're gonna
no that it would live off of the flake skin. Actually, that would definitely turn Gattaca on its like head there, Tegan. I love that idea now.
I can see it having a really big, wide tongue. Sort of just, as it approaches people, it licks the concrete where they've stepped.
No,
it attaches itself to people with dandruff or
oh god,
psoriasis of the and whatnot.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes, Rachel. A surprisingly dust-free building.
Protein and other minerals.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay, so this is good. I like this. I like the monster jam we're having here. Okay, so let's leave that, right? Let's leave the idea of salts or perhaps the cast off skin flakes. That I think portends very, very well for our monster. Okay, so we've determined then what it eats.
I'm sorry, I'm just reading chat and it's just like it's just going in very weird directions. It tastes of strawberry, Stefan. Do you think? Interesting. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay, so we determine what it eats. We need to determine how it rests in its environment. So when this creature decides to rest, where does it do so? Right? What is the environment that it needs? Everybody rests better in a different way, right? So I know a ton of people that have to have a fan on when they sleep. They have to have, in the spring or in the summer, they have to have a window open because they need the breeze that comes in. Or maybe people have favorite animals that have to sleep in the sun and will literally move as the sun moves throughout their apartment or their house to make sure that they're in full view of that bright sun to warm them. So this creature, when it sleeps, what does it need from its environment?
Something cold. It likes the cold for sleeping.
Okay. That's a temperature. Could also be a type of texture, like perhaps it needs to sleep in an underground concrete area. Cold, dark, and moist.
Oh my, that kind of stream, huh?
I mean, you knew we'd get there eventually.
Eventually.
Oh, yeah.
I'm surprised it took this long, to be honest.
Right.
It is. We made it an hour before the M word showed up. I'm like,
There are a lot of swamp coolers in the South, Tegan. That's very true. A good point to make. I don't mind the cold portion of it, but I want to create like an additional accessory or sort of add-on modifier, right? I think it has to be cold, but I think it has to be a firm surface. So like
Mhm.
the creature can't sleep in water.
Right.
It has to have something like a muggy basement or something to that effect. Perhaps a pump room, right?
Hmm.
There's tons of these water pumps at SeaWorld, and there's a lot of mechanical spaces there. So, and whether they be power centers or whether they be just water pump houses, that would be a great place. I could see big pipes, 2 or 3 big pipes that funnel water all over the space here in this SeaWorld amusement park. And just behind one of these larger tubes, these larger pipes, this thing, whatever we determine with chat, whatever we determine it looks like eventually, it rests, it waits.
I am with Miss Amadou. I am with you, Em. I think it needs to be, they're moist, damp. There needs to be some type of hydration in something there because in my brain, the way this is going, it's not going to probably have fur or something. It's going to be fairly smooth skin, and it's maybe that it absorbs through the skin. It's hydration. So if it's eating one thing, then this is how it drinks.
I got to point out Staffan's idea here of like a cold food prep table.
Ooh,
I think it's fantastic.
I love that.
Because imagine being the person that comes in to do food prep at like 5 a.m, and you're just carrying in the beginning of your day. You're setting down your stuff. You're getting into the refrigerators to get stuff out. And out of the corner of your eye, you see something in that food prep table move, or perhaps the cabinet below just shuts. And everything else is quiet.
Under the sink. It hides under the sink.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. So
hmm
it's got to be a firm surface. It's got to be cold. Then
This is giving me flashbacks for my Call of Cthulhu scenario that I wrote for Nazcraig for Gen Con. Let's just say there are definitely some food prep services in that particular one.
so let's say not only does it have to be cold, not only does it have to be a firm surface, but there must be the nearby supply of electricity because the creature is drawn to the electrical hum of machines, which I think will also portend well for it in the future.
Okay, Hapless May just saying the ice cream machine, and that's why it's always down. That's why the ice cream machines never work because
Totally possible.
oh, I love it.
Totally possible.
Love it.
Although, if the Big M is in league with this creature, that could also prove a scenario breaking point at some point for this creature. Okay, so we've determined where it lives. We've determined what its regular sort of wake sleep pattern is. We've now determined where it sleeps, or the types of places where this creature would find rest. What is one or two other things we have to lock in about the overall environment of where it lives before we can move on to the actual creature building portion?
How does it move around to get to its victims, so to speak, in the broad daylight?
So it's an interesting idea. I want to make sure that it's not too creature focused. I want to stay in the environment.
Not how it's mobile, but what does it use to get around the park to get to people?
Great point. Okay, so what does it use to traverse the park? So I will submit that it can use. I'll do something that's sort of simple, and that is the available water pipes.
Mm-hmm.
It has the ability to get in through valves. We'll just say after a fashion. It has the ability to pass through seemingly airtight valves and get into these spaces.
Well, that makes sense.
Oh, hitchhikes on the staff members and guests. Oh, that's creepy.
Oh,
I love that. I love that. We don't even know how it does it. We're just going to immediately write that down. So it's going to hitchhike
on the bottom of your shoe when you leave the restroom.
It's going to be in your back pocket.
That's
in your fanny pack somehow.
That's a winner. Do people still wear them? Anyway.
Yes,
Yes.
at parks, at theme parks. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
I don't get
yes,
out
they
much.
do.
Ooh, that's another one, right? Tifa Games mentioned the drains. There are going to be water drains all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm going to submit that it could use both. I love the idea of it sort of like skin riding on people without them knowing it, but I also like the idea that maybe when it gets caught or as an immediate egress, what it does is it slides down the drain before you can potentially find it. Okay.
Oh dear Lord. Sorry, reading chat. Maybe that's a mistake.
No.
Harold. Harold? Oh, that M? Harold. Okay.
No one has actually seen Harold since I hired him, and now he's always in the dolphin costume. He's very committed to it. Okay. That's good for Whimsy. I like that, though. Like, I love the idea of it could potentially possess enough intelligence that it could change its shape to become a mascot. And maybe that's something that you could tie in to a scenario with quote, Harold, in that they meet the mascot at the front gate and they never know that they're meeting the monster first thing. And then the monster is intelligent enough to gauge their reaction to the mascot and decides which one to kill first based on their reaction.
The ones who are scared of it go first. How dare you?
It smells. You know, it sits there and sniffs all the people at the park until it finds something that seems to appeal to it, that seems to meet its needs, gives off whatever pheromones are necessary, and then it can stalk that victim.
So its locomotion then is it hitchhikes on staff members in some way. We have not determined how it does this. Or it moves through drains. I think that's going to lend itself to the creature having some sort of shape-changing ability or being able to transmogrify its physical form into whatever it needs to. And so we'll have to see how that gets. All right, one more. We need one more thing we need to know about it. What's the one environmental thing that we need to unlock before we can move? We've determined its food source. Ugh. We've determined the environment in which it lives, the environment in which it sleeps, how it moves around. Let's determine. Let's determine one thing about the environment it must avoid. Let's build in a natural hindrance that this thing has decided to. Yes, it's decided to live at SeaWorld. Yes, it's decided to do all these things. But what is the thing about this creature living at SeaWorld that actually it's not good for it?
Maybe it's extra sensitive to various chemicals. So most of SeaWorld, the water would be natural water. There wouldn't be any like chlorine or other chemicals in it. Especially if it's eating off of us. If someone's highly inebriated or has drugs in their system or has some kind of like doused in perfume or something, those are not going to be chosen as victims because they have some kind of chemical within the system. It's going to look for things that are very clean and pure, so to speak. And it's any of the drains or any of the machines that actually have chemicals in them for some reason, it's not going to touch. In fact, it'll completely avoid it because if it absorbs it gets hit full force. It doesn't have any kind of defense mechanism internally to be able to fight any of that off.
Okay. It's an interesting thought. We'll put a pin in there. What do you think? What is the one thing in its environment that it can't handle?
Sunscreen.
Okay, sunscreen. So I'll just ask.
That's what I was thinking.
Follow up, right? Why is it sunscreen that it can't handle?
Well, if we're going with the idea that it eats skin or skin cells, sunscreen soaks into the skin in a way a lot of other things don't. and so skin absorbs it in a way, and it might be unpalatable or even dangerous to it. That was my thinking.
Okay. So
If we're going with the idea of what it eats.
yeah, no, it's important to
Mhm.
think about, right? So the
Mhm.
only thing that Chad has mentioned a couple of times has mentioned fresh water because of like the more
Mm.
salt based, but I wonder if I guess I suppose it would then not attack staff members or people who are
Mhm.
drinking water. So it would also serve as a function to keep your investigators hydrated as well.
Hydration's very important.
So if you're drinking water, then it can't eat you because there's fresh water present and it would be repelled by it. Um, so yeah, why don't we say both? Why don't we say
Mhm.
people who are covered in sunscreen because it will block the direct access to skin
Mhm.
cells, and then people who are too close to fresh water, which means it would avoid things like drinking fountains,
Mhm.
and it would avoid things like parts of the shower room, which would not be salt water. They'd be fresh water, so you wouldn't get them in the shower. You could still get them in the kitchen because the creature could avoid potentially the fresh water there. Okay. All right. I like that. So here's what I want to do, chat. I would like to cycle forward to building the creature itself. So we've determined a lot about its environment and how it interacts with that environment. Now the question is, what kind of creature is it? So the first thing I want to determine is essentially its structure. So creatures come in a lot of different forms. Monsters can be made of all sorts of things. Is it something which resembles a humanoid shape? Is it something which is totally alien? Is it something which might be perhaps mostly amphibian, like trends towards saltwater, uh, trends towards, you know, Father Dagon, Mother Hydra, etc. So we gotta figure out what it's made of. So given all of the stuff that we've listed, Rena, what is this creature to you? What does it feel like it's made out of?
Mhm. I feel like it's a blob of some kind that can change its shape so it can mimic things. But it's gelatinous in its natural form. That's how it can move through pipes. That's how it can move through even getting into the water. It can move through water fairly easily. Salt water, obviously, or chlorinated water, not fresh water. But that's what I visualize. So it can shape itself to different things.
Okay. So Heather, what do you think this thing is made out of?
Hmm. That is a good question. I think the I just see it covered in a very smooth, slick, almost very porous type skin. That's the impression that I'm getting. Like somehow it absorbs all of the stuff. It's very sensitive to anything it comes in contact with. But like smooth, almost aquatic in its styling.
Okay. Aquatic and styling. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different stance, and I'm going to say that it is made of, in essence, psychic energy, and so
Ooh.
it has no physical form whatsoever, and it only takes a physical form when it hasn't fed, and that feeding is what allows it to not only subsist but allows it to stay a little bit transubstantiated, a little bit invisible, at least to the physical realm, right? Unsubstantial. And that's the reason why it has to feed, is because if it doesn't, then it becomes too physical on sort of that prime material realm. And if it's there too long, it gets stuck
Hmm.
and it loses all its powers.
maybe it's more of a blob, like almost like a jellyfish, kind of
Okay.
blobby with the smooth outer coating, but internally it's jellyfish like because it has to be able to access through drains. It has to be able to kind of stick onto its victims. It has to be able to swim through water because it has to kind of maneuver in all of these different environments. Something jellyfish like, blob like, probably with a combination of shorter, longer, very thin tendrils. I don't want to say tentacles per se, but tendrils um, that help it maneuver through things. I mean, if you ever watch an octopus or squid or even a jellyfish with their tendrils trying to maneuver through smaller spaces or other things, you know, they're able to kind of do that. The tendrils guide them and help them push them along and kind of judge the spaces.
Sure. I I'm with you as far as the tentacle thing goes for several different reasons, but there between a jellyfish and between an octopus, there are some vast differences
Yeah,
as far as the physicality of the form. And if you take an octopus with the ability to, you know, unscrew bottles and get into jars and get out of jars, if it latches onto a person, there is no way someone won't know that that's happened.
right.
And so if we think that it sort of skin rides or travels along staff members, how many staff members is SeaWorld replacing when this thing arrives? Because every other day they're going to be losing somebody screaming about some strange thing that's, you know, attached to them. Not that I have any problem with it. I'm just trying to make sure that it makes sense after we loose it on
So
the world.
yeah. So what if you had a jellyfish, so something similar, not exact, but something akin to a jellyfish form, but with the maneuverability and the intelligence of like an octopus?
Sure. It's fictitious, so we're just making it up as we go. We can totally do all
Mhm.
that. There's nothing that says that we can't. Okay, so a blob or some type of jellyfish which has tendrils, maybe not tentacles, but tendrils, which allow it some sort of motor function, right? Um, Perhaps then we give it an ability, and that is the ability to subvert any intelligent creature's muscle movements when it attaches to them. And so when it does come out of a drain, when it does come out of a cold space where it's staying, and it latches onto a person, the reason why they don't run away is because they get essentially full control over that thing's bodily movements. And that person unknowingly moves it around without noticing.
Yeah. I like what Katrona says in the chat. It's amazing how many people don't feel leeches when they attach.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's true.
So so if it keeps its form relatively small, light, uh when it attaches, it touches light. I mean, it's not like clinging or digging in. It's almost suctioning, suctioning on, whether it excretes a very, a sticky substance out of its tendrils, or something that, just the gooey body of it just kind of naturally kind of adheres to it. Uh, that would make sense. And then it could just kind of attach itself and, up up the body towards the head or whatever, where it can get the most skin flakes and everything else.
I think it's probably going up the back of people's shirts,
Mhm.
because that's where the largest portion, really the torso is the largest portion where the skin cells are going to be at. So I
Mhm.
guess the question that I would like to answer next, and I'll let Rena help us answer this question, which is, how big is it?
I think it's fairly small because it needs to be, and maybe it keeps itself small depending on which direction we're going with blobbiness, because it has to be able to attach itself without, having tendrils sticking up behind people's heads
Right.
or out of the sleeves. So it needs to be able to hitch a ride without being completely noticed. And that's fairly doable if it attaches itself to people's backs, to the spinal area, because even if it gets a bit damp, everyone expects your shirt to be damp at a water park, whether it's from sweat or from getting splashed in the splash zone or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So Katrina had an idea in chat where it attaches to people's heads. And I have seen that in several different horror movies. Not that I'm opposed to it in general, but I love the idea of it getting into the central nervous system at the base of maybe the base of the neck, and then along the spine where it gets sort of all of the control of your muscles, and then it rides around on you and sits with you as you hang out with your family and watch the killer whales or the dolphins. I like the idea of that. So we'll say then, if we're gonna just get a relative idea of how big it is, do you think it's bigger or smaller than a dinner plate?
Smaller, I think.
Smaller.
Okay. So the nice part about that is that this creature can fit into places that are much, much smaller than, say, a creature that's, the size of a toddler or an 8-year-old or a teenager, which gives it a whole lot more things and places that it can be found at. Okay, so we've determined that it's sort of blob-like, and then it's probably smaller than a dinner plate, maybe the size of a salad plate. My question is, how long are the tendrils?
I think it kept at rest. They would be maybe a couple of inches, but I believe they should be extendable to several inches, so that if it needs to reach out to grab something or kind of wrap itself or hold on to something, it can do so. But it would be like a snail's eye, where it kind of comes, it can extend out and then retract back, and it doesn't, or like an inchworm, similar to the gnat style.
Okay. Thoughts, Rena?
I like that idea of being able to expand. So then you also have potential for fun things like someone discovering it for the first time and the tendrils kind of moving out, and you're doing that thing where you move with it and then it lashes out at you, or retracts completely. I think it's a lot of potential for scene work there.
Oh yeah, I agree.
So many fun things.
Okay, so yes, you can see Elvis getting really revved up to use this thing. So we have something about salad plate or smaller that has retractable tendrils. So how thick is this creature?
I don't think it's very thick at all. I think it's very thin and lightweight, especially if it's using itself to control the muscles and the nervous system of whatever it attaches to. I think they'd be very thin and light.
Okay, fair enough.
Makes them harder to see as well.
Certainly, and they can hide in more spaces if they're nice and thin. They could actually hide under plates. And then we get back to Stefan's idea of that, cold prep table, and you're working at SeaWorld and you pull out a plate and all of a sudden you don't remember what happens to you that day. You wake up and it's the middle of the day and you're sitting outside the park. No idea how you got there. Because I love the idea of its tendrils causing some sort of memory loss where it sort of overrides the system. Which we can get to. Which we should get to right now, actually. So I want to talk about its powers in effect. So we know that it can take over the central nervous system of the body. We also know that it has a requirement, right? These skin cells, potassium that it pulls out of the bodies that it attaches to. But what does it do with all that energy? what does it do? And then moreover, why does it do it?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's important when we talk about monsters and creatures. If you're going to give a creature an ability, it has to have a reason for having it. And it isn't just, oh, I'm going to mess up some investigators with this cool power. Because after a while, you're really just, you're just sort of packing whatever spells or abilities or, powers you can onto a creature for nothing else than just to have them, right? So what power does it have, right? And then what does it have it for? And we can list a couple of them. I'm sure chat will give us power examples for sure.
Well, I like the idea of the memory loss,
Mm-hmm.
the temporary memory loss. Like it's almost like an electrical impulse that kind of temporarily short circuits its victims' goings on long enough that it can feed on what it needs to. The motivation, which is probably one of the easiest, most primal, and potentially one of the most dangerous and scary, is that it's doing it for survival and second for reproduction. It's a very probably primal based motivated creature,
Mm-hmm.
because when you attempt to stop or interrupt the most primal of needs, generally in a creature, that's when it's most dangerous. It's almost backed into a corner, and it's going to fight back with everything that it has. So that works for me.
Yeah, I like the idea of it draining the memories or the potassium or the whatever it gets from the host that it's riding on. I love the idea of it using it as sort of a power bank where it could potentially store up enough of that energy and breed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like
Mhm.
the idea of having to place like a gender on it. I like it being able to sort of just completely reproduce on its own. It feels like something that it would do. And maybe we can talk about how many of them might be at SeaWorld at some point.
Anybody remember biology? What was it from one single cell to divide it into two? Does anybody remember what that's called? Was it osmosis that did that?
Osmosis, I believe.
Osmosis?
Mitosis, I think.
Was it mitosis?
Yes.
I think so.
When it
Ask the
gathers
English
up,
teacher.
if it feeds and it successfully stays alive long enough, eventually it maybe would be growing. Maybe it starts very, very small and grow to that size of that solid plate. And after a point, it realizes it has to kind of break itself off into any number of pieces, and then they all go back to being small. And then
Maybe, or maybe it gets
each of
enough
them
and it leaves a copy of itself on a victim when it has consumed enough, and then it goes about its own business while the copy continues to do the next thing, which is find the next victim. And you could create very quickly probably a small little clutch of these things that are running around and causing havoc. Okay, so I like the idea of it using the tendrils to steal memories and control the body. It does so to give itself time to feed, because the feeding in that case can't be fast. It's probably slow.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're sucking potassium and other nutrients out of a host, if you do it too quickly, the host will notice. Right? So it does that slow. Any other powers that you think the creature might have? I'm going to scroll up in chat real quick. Oh, it repairs herniated discs. I like that idea.
Wouldn't that be useful?
Skin flaking from sunburn. Oh, that is a good point, Katrona.
Okay.
I would definitely think that. Yeah.
That's a good point. So it can steal memories, and let's say that its other power is reproduction.
Mm.
And that is what it's going to use that sort of skin cell collection for. It has to collect the skin cells and then be able to create the creature basically out of the dead skin of other creatures. So in a way, it's kind of doing recycling.
I like that.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'd like to do then is give it some relatively basic ability scores. I think we're all fairly familiar with Call of Cthulhu and BRP for the most part, as far as the numbering system there goes. But I think I'll dumb it down just a little bit, and I'll just say, on a scale of 1 to 10, or potentially 10 to 100, what you're playing with percentages, how strong do you think this creature is? Like physically, how much could it exert?
I think strength is probably one of its lower stats, thinking stat wise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's very high in strength. 4 or 5? 40 or 50?
Yeah, I tend to think that it's probably lower than that, actually. I think it's probably
Okay.
a 2 or
Yeah.
a 3. I don't think it's very strong at all. But I think that works to its own advantage. So we'll just put like a 3 there.
Okay.
So let's determine then how rugged the creature is. So if we had to give it a constitution score between 1 to 10, how hardy is this creature?
See, for that, I might give it a 4, just because it's, even though it's squishy, it could still survive quite a bit of abuse, and in several environments that we've already determined. It can survive in, with the colds and in the water and everything else. So it's reasonably hardy, but you could still probably throw it into a bonfire and have it fry up pretty fast, sort of thing. So it can sustain itself reasonably well within its preferred environment, but outside of that, you'd probably have to stomp the hell out of it to actually squish it enough to kill it. But you could burn it with fire without a second thought, and it would just go, up like that. So I'd say 4.
Chas mentioned the idea that it could have a fluctuating constitution based on how much energy it's collected, whether that be skin or whether that be the potassium it needs to continue sustaining itself. And so I like that idea where we can judge the creature based upon whether or not it has fed recently. So we'll give it 2 values, right? We'll say that its regular con or constitution score is maybe like a 5. So it's fairly hardy. But if it's fed, it's more like a 7. And so, and then we can easily just divide in here and say, every time it reproduces, it loses 10 points of con, or a point of constitution. So if it chooses to split, it does so at the cost of 10 points of the original constitution of the creature. It has to sort of give of itself in that range. Okay.
Makes sense.
So strength and constitution are done. I don't necessarily think it's going to have like an appearance score because it's a monster.
One sexy jellyfish.
That's right. It's got its tendrils shaped just like a beehive, kind of coiffed up. But it should have 2 very important stats. One would be intelligence. So between 1 and 10, I actually think the creature is likely fairly smart.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say that on a 1 to 10, I think the creature's an 8. I think it's pretty smart.
Yeah.
And if you think about natural scales, we don't necessarily have to keep this thing in a box either. So we can completely overcome the 99 rule for a monster, but I think we can do that in the next ability. And that next ability is going to be POW. I think the creature is very willful. And it would have to be because it's taking over other people.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's going to be an immediate sort of POW versus POW challenge where we say, okay, here's this mystical ability, and we're going to utilize this mystical ability to take over this creature's this other creature's mind, and so I'm going to give it a 9. And it looks like many
Yeah.
many of chat
Yep. I
are-
think the chat's
Yeah.
right there with
Mostly-
us. Yeah. 9.
Chad agrees with that. Okay, so we'll say its willpower is pretty high, and then once we've roughed out that, we need to give it a dex score too, for its
Pretty high index, I'd say.
its agility.
Yes. Very.
8 or 9. 'Cause it has to be super dexterous to move around the way it does.
Mm-hmm.
And with those retractable tendrils and everything, I'd say it's pretty
Yeah.
dexterous.
Very.
Yep, it's going to make all those unarmed combat rolls tons of fun with all of the tendrils.
hmm
Okay, so do we want to derive any other stats? Obviously, it's not going to get a BRP luck stat because we wouldn't want to be that rude. And my question therein is, we can derive MP if we needed to. We don't really necessarily need to go down that road per se, but it's got a fluctuating con score, and that means that it's going to have a fluctuating hit point bar too. And so because of that, I'm going to sort of dovetail back to something that Heather mentioned earlier, which is a potential things which could do it extra harm. So I want to give it things perhaps that it's naturally immune to, or perhaps it is naturally strong against. So you brought up earlier, Heather, that it could be
Mhm.
potentially vulnerable to fire. A very
Yes.
traditional thing to be vulnerable for monsters, because we
Yeah.
as humans love to just sort of kill things with fire.
Well, there's a reason why we like to kill things with fire. It's because it's generally effective.
That's right. Okay, so I think you brought it up earlier. I tend to agree that fire, given the creature's perhaps a flexible or gelatin or non-solid form, that fire is probably a pretty good vulnerability for it to have.
A very, very strong vulnerability. I think that's going to be one of its major. That and being squashed by very, very heavy things. But I think even fire outstrips all of them. I think fire would be the number one.
And that's really when we make a monster what we're looking at, right? We're looking at what are the
Yeah.
hot button things. We want to create those big haves, have-nots, extremes.
An extreme heat, dry heat especially. So I think would also be because it would dry out the any moisture that it has in its body. If it is kind of globby, then anything that would extrude, it would dry up that moisture would absolutely have a big effect on it. So fire would just fry the hell out of it. But like strong heat, I mean, if you took a hair dryer to this thing, it could definitely have a strong effect to it.
So Rach Makes 94 brings up in chat extreme cold as it's water based.
Yeah.
I wonder if we feel about it being more water based, if we feel like cold would naturally sort of slow down its processes.
Yeah, cold would put it into. I like what is it neat? Not
It is not. It is
the
not.
I
It is not.
not I can't pronounce that. But the extreme cold may actually put it into a resting state like hibernation. I think that's
Maybe
right on.
start slowing it down gradually, and then if you keep it in the super cold place long enough, like it has to be extreme cold because it likes sleeping in colder places, but extreme cold slowly puts it into a sleep. So several rounds later, if you keep it there.
The investigator makes the power roll to keep themselves from getting taken over, and they have to pull this thing off of themselves. And the place they put it is like a chest freezer.
hmm
It doesn't kill it. It just puts it into hibernation until someone invariably like goes in and goes, "Oh, are we having crab for lunch? What's this?" And they pull it out, and then
And it
when
wakes up.
wakes up, and then we have our wonderful face hugger moments.
It would also allow any investigators to be able to find a way to study it. So they just keep it extra cold. They can keep it in storage. They can pull out, take bits off, whatever they need to actually experiment on it to be able to do all those kind of fun things with. So
Okay, so it's
Yeah, definitely.
vulnerable to fire for sure, but cold is a method of slowing it down.
Hmm.
Okay. So, what's something beyond its powers that the creature can use to its advantage?
I think it's resistant at the very least to piercing weapons because you shoot a jellyfish, it's just going to absorb it and go, ha 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 ha.
Yeah,
You thought that would work.
I love the idea of it being somewhat semi-resistant to projectile weapons, especially, or even like knives.
Hmm.
Anything that would pierce it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Opinion brings up in chat camouflage. I do think that this thing should have some sort of ability to blend in spaces. Like hiding is the thing that it is really good at,
Yeah.
and I would almost use a sort of adapted RuneQuest rule where its bonus to hiding, right, once it goes over 100, would deduct from skill perception rolls from other people noticing it. So it acts as an active penalty against other things trying to seek it out. It's that good at hiding, which I think could be a lot of fun in a scene.
But with what it feeds on, it may naturally have kind of a milky, very light milky, kind of peachy pink color to it anyway, which would give it just a basic natural camouflage up against skin. But then if we want to give it even more like chameleon skin style ability, so it can actually the ripple goes through the body and it kind of takes on the general coloring of its surroundings when it sits still long enough to do so. So it has to like stay in place and then it kind of ripples through the body across the skin. That would be, I could easily see that could hide in plain sight.
Yeah, I could see that, and I could also see it. Yeah, it being completely clear too,
Mhm.
where when it absorbs it, it doesn't take any pigmentation change at all, and that alone helps it hide places. So that's an interesting idea. I like both of those ideas. Rena, you have any thoughts on that?
I was thinking translucent, kind of like those jellyfish people step on at the beach because you can't see them at all unless you're actively looking for them. And even then, they're kind of hard to see because it's like looking straight through them into the sand and you can't tell if it's water or a jellyfish there. So I was thinking something along those lines as well. Wrap itself around a flower canister and you can't see it.
I love the idea of this thing hiding amongst other jellyfish at the beach.
Hmm.
And then just one day somebody walks across it and bang, suddenly there's a problem. And it isn't just that this creature has gone glommed onto someone to take nutrients from them or to get them to do something, but the creature's using that host to transport them someplace that they want to be.
That's how they got to SeaWorld in the first place.
Right. And the reason why they're staying at SeaWorld is because of the sheer volume of potential targets.
Hmm.
Right. But this thing could potentially live just about anywhere, right?
Hmm.
As long as it can meet the requirements that it has for its environment. It needs to sleep somewhere cold and hard, right? It can't be in water. And it needs to be able to get a hold of potassium and sort of dead skin cells feeding locations. So I like that because it doesn't just confine this creature to one specific space, and that's really, really important. So the Skip, as you mentioned in chat, your question in chat, does it peeing on it hurt it? I don't think so. I don't. I think that might be one of the things that would separate it from some of the jellyfish species that are out there. I actually like the idea that it wouldn't, because it needs to separate itself and be a little bit different. And what would be great is the hijinks that might ensue when in a scenario when someone says, "Oh, I know how to fix this problem," and they get that,
Peeing would feed it actually, because there would be potassium in the urine.
correct.
Oh, and I like how Skip said that hospitals would be another really good environment for this thing.
This would be fantastic in hospitals.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so chat and the guests here, any other things that we want to add on to this, or do we feel like we're pretty close on this creature? There is one thing we're missing, but we'll get to that here at the end. What's its motivation? Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. So we need to determine why it does this.
Mm.
For so many reasons, when monsters are created, they need to have specific motivations. Otherwise, their relevancy in any story can be a bit lacking. And if you're out there creating scenarios or running them for your own players, you need to make sure that the monsters make sense.
Mhm.
There have been, and I'm certain that the guests here have done it as well, there have been monsters that I have removed from scenarios and campaigns because they simply lacked relevancy. Or I could see the players creating an enormous and unnecessary tangent based on this specific thing, and then who knows where your night goes, right?
Mhm.
So how did this thing come to be? And then, moreover, what is its purpose, Rena?
I don't think it's malicious. It's not out actively trying to cause chaos or create harm. It's just like, this is a lesser life form, and I am hungry, and I need to feed, and I need to reproduce. And well, you're like what you eat. You eat cows. You're kind of like a cow.
Okay.
I
So-
think.
So we're coming at it then from like a species superiority standpoint where
Mhm.
there's no malice here. You're simply food.
That's what I'm thinking.
Interesting. All right, Heather,
Mhm.
any other ideas? Why, what's its motivation?
No, I really have to kind of agree with Rita with everything that's been put together. It really does feel like it's kind of this, um, like any kind of swarm, kind of mentality where it's really just there to, it's, it's trying to survive. It eats, it breeds. It's trying to make as many of them as it can to expand its brood,
Mm.
so to speak. Even broods, you look at bees, you look at ants, you look at all of these other kind of brood type creatures naturally, and they'll get to a certain point and then they'll split off into other areas. Sometimes there are infestations, which could very easily any investigator could be called in to deal with what the hell is this. And there's just everything, all this stuff everywhere. Or people, is in the hospital setting. I mean, there's even with that simplified motivation, there are still a number of different plot options that you can utilize a creature like this for.
Yeah, I agree. I like this as the motivation. I like that there's very little malice. It's really just about consuming and reproducing and treating the people or the things that which it feeds on, because it doesn't necessarily have to be humans, but they're going to be the thing which is most readily available and likely easiest to use as a transportation device, unless you're talking about, fish or dolphins or something like that in the salt water where it can move up on. Okay.
I guess one of the other options, if someone a GM really wanted to make this kind of a malevolent thing, these could be the tiny offspring of some greater being with a malevolent, idea of conquest and takeover that's maybe deep within the ocean or deep within the earth or something like that. I think there were some points to that in the chat. And this is just their way of collecting. Not they feed off of the victims, to survive and to multiply and to make more of themselves, but they're taking the memories and they're taking the information that they get from us, and that gets fed back in the hive mind to this greater creature for eventual nefarious purposes. So, I mean, they could go in that direction as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of potentially it being an experiment gone wrong. I love experiments gone wrong. I love the idea of like a high-powered brain institute or a surgeon who works on brains trying to determine how to unlock a human potential or how to make a different food source. And they're studying these rare form of jellyfish, and there is a mutation, right, of some sort, as any good monster movie has. And then all of a sudden, the lead scientist is consumed in this furious destruction of his brain. It forms this new creature, which decides, oh, well, this is the way we need to reprioritize the apex predator role here on this planet, and I'm gonna, see how many humans that I can consume. And
You can have. Oh, sorry.
no, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was thinking, what if it's for an actual good for humanity that they start with, which is if we can get the jellyfish to control the nervous system, you have helping people walk again, like paraplegics and so on. We can get them to move again with the help of these creatures. And it starts off really good with what we're trying to do, and then it goes horribly, horribly wrong, which is one of my favorite storylines. Is we're actively trying to do something good here, and then bad things happen.
The road paved with good intentions.
Mm.
Indeed. Okay. So I'm fairly happy. I'm fairly set with the creature. I think that we've made a wonderful monster this evening, and I want to thank everybody for joining us in chat. I think folks here hopefully had a lot of fun. We truly enjoyed your interaction. And I think what I'd like to sort of surprise on both our guests and potentially chat is, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our notes and I'm going to compile them. And perhaps next month we'll have a fun one-on-one with an investigator as they explore SeaWorld or another strange location where they might run into such a creature, and we'll see how they handle it. So before we break, I want to go through that sort of introduction order again and give folks a chance to let people know who they are, where they can find them, what their promotional items are, or what they're doing right now creatively. And we'll start with Rena.
So I've been Rena, and always will be as far as I know. But you can find me on the Discord as Keeper Rena. You can find me on Blue Skies, the Inevitable Rena as well, or Rena Henze. I used to be on the old place that I will not name, but no longer, as it's become a bit too toxic for me. You can also find me on Instagram as the Inevitable Rena, where I mostly post pictures of my cat and talk about my upcoming projects. You can find my scenarios for Call of Cthulhu on DriveThruRPG, including Saturday the 14th, which I referenced on this stream. And I have an upcoming scenario, an LGBTQ plus scenario called Friends of Dorothy, which Mike has gotten to play already. So hopefully that'll be released in Pride Month, but if not, it'll be coming in July. And you can find all of my work there. And I also edit scenarios, so if you're writing something, you're looking for a content editor, or line development editor, proofreader, any of those things, you can reach out to me on the Discord or on Instagram, and I'll be happy to chat with you about your project.
Fabulous. And Heather.
And I'll be doing that with you soon, Rena, because we already talked to Chaosium kind of about that. Again, I am Valley Girl Heather. I can be found primarily under my freelance work, Valley Girl Designs. I'm on the majority of the socials, except the one that has the single letter that we don't talk about because it's dumpster fire. And I have not expanded out to Blue Sky or any of those yet. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, on Twitch, I am getting my own Twitch stream up and running very soon. I'll be on YouTube. You can check out most of pretty much my portfolio on Wix, valleygirldesigns.wix.com//portfolio. Next up, I've got a few various actual plays coming down the pipeline. Please check out the Old Ways podcast. We have our 6 seasons in Sartar. In fact, our latest episode just dropped today, and we are very excited about this. It's been an absolute blast to play. I'm also going to be playing in the Symphony Entertainment stream for Pirate Borg coming up next week. There's another with Rena. Yay! We're very excited. There will be costumes. We will definitely be dressing for that. If you are looking at conventions, I am headed to Columbus, Ohio next month. Next month. Coming down the pipeline I will be at Origins working with Lurking Fears, which I write and run various stuff through. And there's a secret thing that's coming up with that if you happen to be playing in either the Cthulhu Masters or the One Ring Epic. And then for Gen Con, if you really want to play something that I've written, I have written the very first Call of Cthulhu scenario, one-shot, 4-hour game for the Nazcraig organization for Gen Con. They will be running multiple tables, multiple rounds of this all the way through Gen Con. I am very proud of this. I'm very excited. And beyond that, there's a ton of other things, but we'll just go with that.
Okay. So comparatively, I don't do much. I sort of just hang out. I don't really have anything else going on. And life is calm. I'm keeper, sometimes handler, sometimes storyteller. Michael Diamond. I am the chief catalyst, troublemaker, and content director here at The Old Ways. Sometimes The Old Ways podcast. Now, sometimes The Old Ways on Twitch. It really all depends. We're diversifying and, as promised, spreading our tentacles many places. So stay tuned for some streams probably coming up this weekend. And then, as has been announced, next Tuesday, we debut our first long-form Shadowrun game here on Twitch. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. The cast is going to be phenomenal, and we will have to really work hard to survive. So, thank you. And wherever you are, wherever you're watching, good night.